Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon is out now, and the feedback from the gaming community is looking mostly positive. Or very positive if we go by the Steam reviews. But that doesn't mean that the game doesn't have some issues. Tainted Grail is a game I have been looking forward to since I first learned about it being in beta, but having PTSD from so many betas and pre-releases lately, and games that just didn't work when they released, especially coming out of the AAA space lately, I chose to give it some time to cook before investing in it. Looking at you, Dragon's Dogma 2. I still haven't forgiven you for bricking my entire system with your nonsense. When Tainted Grail: Fall of Avalon finally released at an actual reasonable price point, $40, I was willing to give it a try, but I kept my expectations low, especially after being so hyped for Avow and seeing the mediocre game it turned out to be. I was particularly concerned reading about the difficulty and controls, especially after picking the Adventurer difficulty, which is the recommended levels the developers suggest you play the game at. I tend to start all my games on the recommended difficulty mostly so I can give it a fair assessment. Needless to say, I was immediately on the defensive when, in the prologue, which acts as the game's open tutorial level, I was immediately getting almost 1 and 2 shot by enemies and struggling to block and parry anything efficiently. Seeing how little health potions heal and how slow the food items recovered your health, I was starting to think that this was just another overhyped and undercooked game. Using the scrolls like as the next hot button phrase to build following hype while simultaneously refusing to deliver more than a mediocre experience or worse, waste player time and money. But I was really enjoying the aesthetic of the game. Graphically, Tainted Grail doesn't reinvent the wheel, however, in many aspects, this is a good thing. So many AAA games release with graphics requirements unoptimized that only the most powerful rigs can actually handle, while still maintaining decent FPS and system stability. And this isn't just a PC gaming issue, it's becoming more and more common in the console space as well. So finally being able to actually set my rig to ultra settings at full resolution and maintaining a playable frame rate was a breath of fresh air. Fall of Avalon goes through a very dark fantasy vibe which is captured extremely well early in the prologue and holds strong throughout the game. A strict contrast to games like Avowed that chose to adopt a more cartoony, overly clean aesthetic that many felt was too far dismissed from the original source material. The more I played, the more I began to realize that the problem wasn't the game, the problem was the player. Despite Fall of Avalon being referred to as a Scrolls-like, the reality is the combat and mechanics of the game are more akin to something like Kingdom Come Deliverance, where you are meant to approach encounters from a realistic mindset. Coming from Skyrim and Oblivion, it is not uncommon for you, even in early game, to easily fight 1v2, 1v3 or even 1v4 fights against enemies while you hold your own. In Tainted Grail your chances at winning in even a 2v1 are very slim. Instead, Fall of Avalon wants you to make use of positioning, range, dodging, parrying, blocking, tactical retreating, and even elevation. The game gives you an entire toolkit regardless of your class and doesn't just expect you to use it, it requires that you use it if you want to survive. The only real issue I have with this system is it doesn't really explain this concept enough early on. Now, an argument can be made that too many games hold your hand these days, treating the player like they are a child in a games targeted towards teens and mature audiences. But there are some mechanics that are a little too vague at best, so rather than do a full review, I wanted to more flesh out some of the in-game mechanics that I feel some players may be struggling with, give some helpful advice mainly for helping you get started early game, and, if enough people really like this video, later I will give some more structured advice on how to make class builds. First I want to go over what difficulty you should choose when you first start playing the game. The difficulty in Tainted Grail: Fall of Avalon isn't quite as straightforward as other games like Elder Scrolls. If anything, I would consider the difficulty of the game to be more akin to a Souls-like if those games had a difficulty slider. To be fair, Tainted Grail does try to explain this to you when you are selecting your difficulty, but if you're coming from games like Skyrim, Oblivion, or other similar games, then you are likely not going to understand just how much your mistakes are actually punished. I would compare Fall of Avalon more to the Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind, but I hesitate to do so because I haven't played that game in a very long time and I can't be sure that, when I played, if it was just me being bad at the game, or if the game actually was meant to be as challenging as I felt it was. Also, like every Bethesda game, Morrowind has a ton of exploits that you can take advantage of even in the early game, and Tainted Grail, at least for now, doesn't seem to have as many. Most players jumping in for the first time are likely going to pick Adventurer difficulty. Or if this is the very first time playing what has been described to them as a Scrolls-like Explorer. There is also an additional option when choosing Explorer difficulty for Story-based. For the sake of keeping this video as concise as possibly, I am going to cover mostly the Adventurer difficulty setting, as not only was it the option I first started with, but it is also the intended way Tainted Grail, Fall of Avalon is meant to be played. Easy reduces the damage dealt by the enemies and increases your own, along with increasing healing yield and resource gain. Story mode is super easy, at least from my experience testing it. Hard very much fits its name. Survival mode has permadeath, and I didn't really test it. As per the text, it is an unbalanced experience, and I feel the game is plenty challenging enough on Adventurer difficulty. I was initially going to cover all difficulties, but Tainted Grail, the Fall of Avalon, allows you to switch your difficulty in games similar to any Scrolls-like game, with the exception of survival mode, so I felt that was unnecessary, as if you feel the challenge is too high or too low, you can adjust up or down as you play. Regardless of difficulty, the game starts you off the same way. You are in a cell in a place called Asylum Island. A guard wakes you from your sleep, and here you can begin to pick some class features, allowing you to flesh out your build early on. After a few choices and snarky remarks, the guard promptly Alt F4s and you begin your adventure. Though you are told to head left, the game awards you for exploration, and exploring you should definitely do. There are a lot of really good items and equipment in this little tutorial area that will absolutely help you out just getting started. Many, if not all, can carry you through the entire first area of the game. Something to note about loot in Fall of Avalon: it is area-based. Especially weapons and some armor. The tutorial/prologue equipment is meant to carry you about halfway through into the first area, where you can and likely should replace most, if not all of it, with better equipment for your build. There isn't really a color coding system in this game similar to Scrolls-like games. Yes, blue weapons in Tainted Grail are objectively better than white or gray tier. However, that does not mean if you find Percy a white tier greatsword, two-handed weapon as it is called in Tainted Grail, that has better damage/scaling than your blue tier long sword, one-handed as it is called in Tainted Grail, that you shouldn't replace it. The TLDR of this is basically, as you move further into the game, and especially as you leave one map and move into the next, if you find a weapon/armor/spell etc. that has bigger numbers and better effects, you should definitely use it in place of one you are currently using, so long as it fits the class/build you are going for. One of the first things you will likely notice right off the bat when you encounter your first enemy is everything in this game hits like truck. This is where the game is trying to show/tell you early on that this is not Elder Scrolls, it is its own thing. Depending on your build choices, you may also realize early on that blocking and parrying is handled way different than how Elder Scrolls or even Souls-like handle blocking. Once again, to the game's credit, it tries to explain this in its tutorial pop-up, but at least for me, it wasn't really informative enough. Holding down block brings up your shield or weapon, which only stops a very small percentage of the damage and absolutely chunks your stamina bar. What the game wants you to do is tap your block button to attempt to parry the attack and mitigate a larger portion of the damage and force an opening for you to counter. Or, dodge out of the attack range. Dodging is another mechanic that can be a little misunderstood when you first get started, especially if you are starting on Adventurer difficulty. Different attacks have different ranges and hitboxes. Saying it out loud sounds obvious, but again, when coming from other games with similar look and feel, myself especially, found them a little confusing. Your attacks function in the exact same way as the enemy attacks. Direction, movement, and the placement of your targeting reticle determines how and where the attack will land. Yes, that tiny little dot dead center of the screen you may not have even noticed absolutely matters in Tainted Grail, Fall of Avalon.
Yikes.
It is quite possible for you and the enemy to completely miss what in other games would have been a hit just by the swing being ever so slightly off. Larger weapons also can hit you and the enemy while you or they are standing behind the target. So positioning in this game is incredibly important, both offensively and defensively. One of the ways I have found that works best for dodging is to actually dodge completely past the enemy and then keep moving a few steps before turning around to re-engage. Once you get the hang of it, dodging back, out, around, and side to side also works for taking advantage of openings. Though be careful dodging in any direction you cannot see, as you can dodge into obstacles or off ledges. You do not have iframes, or if you do, they are very minimal, and there is fall damage in this game, making it very possible to take massive and even lethal damage because you messed up a dodge. Dodging, attacking, parrying, and even running while in combat takes a lot of stamina early on. Thankfully there are skills to help reduce the cost, and as you level up you gain a larger stamina pool alongside your health and magic to help mitigate this, but for now you want to try and pay very close attention especially to stamina and health. There is a mechanic in the Fall of Avalon called overexertion, which is represented by what looks like little waves underneath your stamina bar, which causes you to slow down and your character to audibly breath heavily. Similarly, you only get a set number of optimal dodges. Trying to dodge again after that brings up what looks like a broken bone icon, which causes you to make a small and largely ineffective back hop and move much slower. Optimal dodge is affected by your carry weight and encumbrance. The heavier your armor and the more you are carrying, the less optimal dodges you have. Encumbrance and to a lesser extent the movement speed stat also affects your overall movement speed in general, so it is important to take both these into account when you are picking up things and equipping armor. You will be looting pretty much every single item you see, especially in the early game, so be sure you keep all of this in mind so you don't find yourself suddenly moving at a snail's pace in the middle of a fight. Once again, Tainted Grail has skill trees and attributes which helps to mitigate this effect, and leveling also adds a small boost to your encumbrance level, but for the purposes of this video, I'm focusing more on the getting started aspects of the game rather than build crafting. Fall of Avalon handles healing both in and out of combat in largely the same way. Health and mana potions work by instantly restoring their respective bars up to the potion's allotted amount. For the most part, this is straightforward and in line with most Scrolls-like games. Food, on the other hand, is handled differently and is extremely important, especially when you are first starting out, unlike the way it is handled in most Scrolls-like games, namely Skyrim. Food, when consumed, slowly restores health over time. You will see a gray-white bar fill in the darkened section of your missing health while your remaining health raises slowly. During this time any damage you take will be subtracted from the red portion, not the white. Meaning you can very easily die after consuming a food item. It is important to remember that any time you use food to start to regenerate health, that you immediately back off and take a more defensive approach rather than continuing to be offensive. Food will be your main source of healing through a large portion of the game, especially the tutorial and first area, unless you are choosing to focus more on alchemy. Even then, you will be limited by the alchemical supplies you can find or buy, whereas food items will be more common. Another thing important to note is that, unlike alchemy, where you can only create potions that you have the recipe for, you can use the experimental function for cooking and you will always get something that is usable for the purposes of healing. Overhealing is possible with food, meaning it is very possible that even when you are at max health, taking damage will cause the white bar to reappear and your health to begin to regenerate again, so more is always better when it comes to food. For example, if your health total is 95, but you use a food item that restores 120, so long as the food effect is still active, you can take damage after your health reaches full and still regenerate more. On the note of using food potions or other consumable items, you will only use the item in your current active slot, which is the slot at the bottom of your consumable slots. Pressing right on the D-pad or C on keyboard will toggle your active slot, it will not use the other item. You can carry 3 consumables max and toggle them in-game. In your character window, the replenishable slot is the slot that is both active by default and automatically replenishes with another like item from your inventory. So if you have food in that slot, it will auto-refill with another food item till you have none left. Same with potions, etc. Magic works a little differently than it does in a Scrolls game or a Souls-like. Spells have 2 attack options, a tap action and a charge action, in the same way weapons have a light and heavy attack. With weapons, it works as it does in Scrolls games for the most part. Tapping the attack button has you use a light attack while holding the button charges up a heavy. With weapons it's important to note that when you charge a heavy attack, you will not release the attack until you release the button or you run out of stamina. For spells it works similar. Tapping the attack button will release a quick spell effect. For many spells this is used for building up rapid status effects and dealing short bursts of damage. Charging a spell, however, consumes a certain portion of mana till the spell is considered fully charged. You will continue to hold that charge until you release the button. Charging a spell is used for creating a large burst of damage and usually building up a large portion of that spell's respective status effect. The blood magic spells differ in this regard, however, as typically the charge is used to heal you while the light tap is used similarly for burst damage and status. You can choose to release any spell before fully charged to deal less damage if you choose or need to, depending on the situation in game. Summoning spells also tend to function differently in this regard, but since you won't be starting with any of those or will likely not find them directly in the beginning of the game unless you wander way off the beaten path, which is possible and in some cases preferential depending upon your preferred playstyle, I won't talk about those in this video. Okay, so I've covered all the basics: combat, movement, healing, magic, gear and loot. Now I want to touch base on what to do once you are out of the tutorial zone. Avoiding spoilers, I will just say you find yourself stranded on the shores of Avalon. Tainted Grail has several maps broken up into different acts. The Island Asylum acts as the prologue and opening tutorial. The second map is the Horns of the South, which serves as Act I of the game. Here you are left to your own devices, free to explore the pseudo-open world and create your own adventure. Depending on your playstyle, you may benefit from just running off in whatever XYZ direction of your choosing, but since this video is tailored more towards those who may be struggling, we're going to go straight towards the main objective. This area is extremely important for a number of reasons, the main being that here you find your first stash. As I mentioned earlier, encumbrance and armor weight quickly becomes a problem as you pretty much need to be looting everything when you start out. You need food and alchemy stuffs for healing and buffs early on, not to mention, the tutorial weapons and in some cases even the armor are going to quickly become outclassed. Trying to carry everything with you all the time is just not going to work. It is also extremely likely as you explore you're going to find weapons, armor and other things that you can't use yet but may be beneficial to you at a later time. So having somewhere to stash these items is going to be super important. Did you see what I did there? Cringe aside, the stash is also important because while you are in the keep you can craft and sell directly from your stash. This is incredibly powerful if you want to go for a more crafting focused build. Armor and weapon components get super heavy along with food components, and you're going to want to save your encumbrance for your weapons and armor as you can, and should create multiple loadouts for your character to use while in combat. There is an alchemist in the keep, but he's not directly out in the open. To access him you want to come through this door here and go back into this room back here. The NPCs move around, so sometimes he may not be in this room, but what matters more is that you have access to the alchemy crafting table, so you don't have to carry your crafting items with you throughout the time you're exploring. Talking to the various NPCs not only nets you side quests, for those completionists that just have to do every single quest, but also, many have stores where you can not only buy new gear, but also purchase crafting recipes. Another nice thing about the merchants is when you sell something to a merchant, those items do not disappear, so if you accidentally sell something then decide later you could have really used it, you can buy it back for the price you sold it rather than an inflated price. The bounty board is really good for getting some early experience, and if you are able to defeat the bandit leader, all of them drop decent loot which can carry you through this entire first map depending upon your build. This area also is how you progress the main storyline forward, so having the fast travel point available early on for when you are ready to tackle the main plot is just an overall boon. I hope this video has helped anyone that may have been struggling with this game like I first did when I started it. Judging by some of the reviews I've read on Steam, this game has given a few people trouble, and though I haven't experienced much jank while playing, for the most part, I did struggle with some of the mechanics at first till I figured out exactly how the game was designed to be played. Regardless, if you liked the video or it helped you out in any way, please be sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment to let me know if it helped you. And if it didn't, please let me know if it didn't. And if this video is really helpful for enough people, I'll be sure to make some more focused build videos or quest tutorials in the future. But until next time, bye.